My homily today will be about mountaintop moments. So let's begin with a question. Has anyone been to the top of a mountain, whether by car, train, bike, chairlift, or on foot? Show of hands? So many of us have. And we know that a mountaintop view offers us something that we cannot get in other places. In this morning's Transfiguration Gospel, when the three disciples walked up the mountain, they had no idea they would have a dazzling view of Jesus at the summit. As they journeyed down, they realized that making sense of it would be a challenge. For the next few minutes, we will talk about mountaintop experiences in our life, focusing on the journey into and the journey following that experience. It's important for us to remember that dazzling mountaintop experiences usually occur right here on level ground. And the razzle-dazzle itself is not the point of emphasis, but rather how the grace of that dazzling experience transforms us afterwards. Let's consider a few illustrations of transfiguration or mountaintop moments. Think of a time you had an intimate conversation with a trusted friend, spouse, family member, or spiritual guide. Perhaps during the exchange, you realized something special was happening. Yet on the journey following that dazzling intimacy, we may have experienced deeper meaning and transformation as we reflected on and listened to how the beloved one touched us in that moment. I invite each of us in this moment to recall an intimate conversation, bask in its glow, and journey more deeply into love. We'll take a brief, quiet moment now to do this. As a second illustration, mountaintop moments also include journeys into sadness and letting go. In a previous homily, I shared some of the story about the death of my dear 91-year-old mother-in-law, Fran. And I would like to share this now as a transfiguration moment. Stan and I and our 3 children journeyed with Fran throughout her illness and her time in hospice care. She had difficulty letting go in many of life's experiences, and this ultimate letting go was especially difficult for her. At the moment of her death, Stan and I and 2 of our children were with her. The room felt completely saturated with love, and I felt like my heart was going to burst. The experience was so transforming for me that 15 years later, I am still journeying with it. I felt it come alive today through Jan Richardson's words. For this experience truly reveals everything it knows and dazzles with unforgettable light. As another example, mountaintop moments can occur as we play or listen to music that stirs our heart, or as we reflect on writings that reach into our soul. This was the case for John Philip Newell, who in his book, Sacred Earth, Sacred Soul, shares his personal experience of 19th century minister and professor Alexander John Scott. Throughout his writings, Scott emphasized the sacred interrelationship of all things and taught that the divine and human are one. Because of this, he was defrocked by the Church of Scotland and barred from preaching in church and teaching in religious universities in Scotland and England. Despite these limitations, Scott continued to share his Celtic spirituality openly and connected with many creative thinkers of his day, including naturalist Charles Darwin and philosopher Thomas Carlyle. When John Philip Newell was a PhD student in the late 1970s, he did his doctoral research on Alexander John Scott. Newell found that after doing 3 years of intense research, he was having frequent conversations with Scott in his nightly dreams. Newell further stated that he never delivered a talk or wrote a publication that didn't in some way reflect the compelling and powerful influence of this great Celtic thinker on his life. John Philip Newell's journey into Scott's life as a doctoral student and his journey following his education brought him to an ever-deepening experience of this mountaintop moment. Perhaps we can each ask ourselves, is there a musician, writer, or someone else that has influenced us so much that we feel the divine essence continuing to reveal itself through them? The last illustration I want to share is probably no surprise to you. It's from nature. A few weeks ago, Stan and I were in Stowe, Vermont, where the snow conditions were perfect. One day, we snowshoed about 4.5 miles to a cabin deep in the woods. And as we journeyed into higher elevations, we noticed that ice had formed on the tree branches. We stopped to admire this glistening crystal forest, and I couldn't help but notice how the divine permeated this stunning scene, one that we wouldn't have been able to witness if we hadn't walked into this hidden gem miles from our accommodations. This mountaintop experience was captured in this photo. See if I can even, here we go. But most importantly, it was captured in our hearts. As we journeyed back to level ground by a different trail, the exquisite beauty we experienced continued to permeate our being and our conversation. The journey into and following this dazzling, extraordinary moment is continuing. As Jan Richardson says, to shine forth and dazzle with light. Whether mountaintop moments of intimacy, sadness, music, writing, nature, or a myriad of other possibilities, remember the journey into and following these experiences and how God self-reveals in these unfolding moments. As we continue our Lenten journey, reflect on a mountaintop moment you have experienced or may be experiencing now, and be open to the transformation that awaits.